The reading this morning is following in the message of the day on baptism, and it is the baptism of Jesus. Matthew chapter 3, verses 13 through 17. Then Jesus came from Galilee to the Jordan to be baptized by John. But John tried to deter him, saying, "I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me?" Jesus replied, "Let it be so now. It is proper for us to do this to fulfill all righteousness." And then John consented. As soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water. At that moment, heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased."
When you came into worship this morning, if you came in that way, or if you came in through that entrance, there is a stand with a bowl of water and some shells in it. And on that stand is this sign, if you didn't see it, that says, "You belong to the family of God. Pause and dip your fingers into the water to remember your baptism. You are God's beloved child." If you didn't have an opportunity to stop when you came in and dip your fingers in the water, then when you leave, I invite you to do that at each one of the 3 stations that are available. Because baptism is an important part of our identity. It tells us who we are. And I want to share with you about claiming your identity with 3 stories. While traveling through Kenya, Episcopal priest and college professor Barbara Brown Taylor, who lives in my home state of Georgia, she lives in North Georgia up in the mountains, she was traveling to Uganda and she found herself in a small tin-roofed church right near the Ugandan border. There was no glass in the windows. This was a building made out of cinder blocks. Because there were no windows, bees kept flying in and out of the windows. I hope they were honeybees. I bet they were. So you could hear their loud buzzing throughout the worship service in the church. And you could hear chickens outside clucking and pecking for food. And the whole congregation sat cross-legged on the dirt floor of this Ugandan church. The women were nursing their children and swatting at flies. It was warm, it was hot. And in front of the church was a communion table that was really an old kitchen table. And this communion table or altar had flowers on it. They were stuffed into two old Crisco cans. Remember Crisco coming in a can? Well, they had a couple of old shortening cans, and the flowers were in there, and they had two very precious candles. You know, our candles represent the light of God with us. And they had two beeswax candles. They were very precious to this church. And, this is my favorite part of the story, a cat slept underneath the communion table. Oblivious to everybody. She didn't care. And it was time for a special celebration. It was time for a baptism. And Barbara Brown Taylor did not know that there was going to be a baptism in this Ugandan church as she was traveling through Kenya, or it was near Uganda, but still in Kenya. So she got to be there. And she said the pastor invited the women. I don't know that men were there. She says that the women were invited forward with their infants, and one by one, the woman would kneel in front of the pastor with her child, and then he would take the baby in his arms. He would name the child, as we named Brent, who's now in the nursery. And so we named Brent, and then he dipped his hand into a large enamel cooking pot. That was the baptismal font. Pretty different from what we have. He then did, as we did this morning with Brent, he poured water over each child's head 3 times. And as the water ran off the child, kind of like some of the water fell onto our baptismal font, the water ran onto the dirt floor of the church. Probably got kind of messy and dirty. Barbara Brown Taylor says, I did not understand a single word of the service. I didn't understand a single word, but I understood perfectly what we were doing. Can you imagine if you were in another country and a service of baptism was happening? Would you understand what was going on? I think you would. Right, here's a different story. Martin Luther, a German reformer, you know his story. Martin Luther struggled much of his life with despair and sadness and depression. He often felt unworthy, as if he were of no value. And in some of his darkest days, he described it as Satan trying to get him to doubt God's love for him and the grace of God, God's grace for him. So to help him in these moments, Martin Luther kept an inscription over his desk on a shelf that read, "Remember, you are baptized. Remember, you are baptized." He would often touch his forehead and remind himself, I am baptized. On occasion when he was in a really low place, when he really felt like Satan was trying to claim his identity, claim Martin Luther's identity, and make him doubt God's love and grace, Martin would take something like a book or an ink pot or a writing instrument from his desk, and he would throw it at the place where he felt like that negative energy was coming from. And he would yell, I am baptized. I want you all to say it with me. You don't have to yell, but I want you to say, I am baptized. I am baptized. The beauty of the story comes in the specific words that Martin Luther used. He wasn't remembering an event from the past. He was remembering what is always happening in our lives. I am baptized, not I was baptized once. Excuse me. He was remembering an identity that was central to his whole being. I am baptized. In worship today, we're remembering our identities as God's beloved children, as we celebrate our baptismal promises, either that we made or that were made on behalf of us when we were children. My last story, there was a woman who was pastor of Hobson United Methodist Church in Nashville, Tennessee. Maybe, I don't know if you all can find it sometime, Gary and Sue, when you go to Nashville. She's not there anymore. Her name is Janet Wolf, but she's not the pastor there anymore. This happened years and years ago. But a woman who was struggling with homelessness, with mental illness, and with chronic lupus visited the church and felt so accepted and included that she decided to become a member of that church. But first she had to go through new member class. So Fayette, a good Southern name. Janet Wolf, the pastor, said that Fayette joined the new member class, and at one class the conversation was about baptism. And the way the Pastor Janet put it, baptism is this holy moment when we are named by God's grace with such power that it won't come undone. I love that. This holy moment when we are named by God's grace with such power that baptism is never going to come undone. And the love and the grace that is part of it can never be undone. Now that phrase grabbed Fayette's imagination, and Janet tells how throughout the class, that class and then there were other classes following in the new member orientation, Fayette would ask the people in the new member class again and again and again, when I'm baptized, I'm what? And the class learned, as a way of loving her and supporting her, to respond together. When she would say, when I'm baptized, I am, and they would say, beloved, precious child of God, and beautiful to behold. Fayette, you are beloved, precious child of God, and beautiful to behold. That's what she was looking forward to hearing when she did get baptized at the church. And she would say, oh, yes. And then she would allow the new member class to go back to their discussion. Well, the day of Fayette's baptism came. She was so excited. And after she was baptized in front of the congregation, like Brent was baptized this morning, she looked at the congregation and she asked, and now I am, and the whole church said together, beloved, precious child of God, and beautiful to behold. So I want you all to say that with me. Okay, I'll tell you one more time. Beloved, precious child of God, and beautiful to behold. Beloved, precious child of God, and beautiful to behold. Fayette was so excited after her baptism. She danced around the whole front of the church and finally calmed down. Beloved, beloved, the voice from heaven proclaimed that Jesus was beloved as his baptismal waters rolled off of him at the Jordan River. Beloved, the name that Jesus started with when he began his new ministry after he had been baptized. Beloved, spoken with such power at Jesus' baptism that it permeated his whole being, his whole life, his way of seeing and believing and understanding. Beloved, Jesus would name those he met in his healing ministry and his teaching ministry. That was his name for them. You are God's beloved children. It gave them a sense of not only healing, but inclusion and hope. Beloved, child of God, that's who all of us are. That story of Fayette goes with me when I do baptisms, and she challenges me, her story challenges me to ask, if I have been named, not if, I know I have been named by God's grace with such power that it won't come undone, what am I to be doing in my life as a follower of Christ? We are named beloved children of God. How are we going to live in such a way that others will know themselves as beloved children of God? The people that we touch in our lives will know that that's their name, especially those who have been given reason in one way or another, or a cause in one way or another, to feel like they are less than loved, they are less than valued, they are less the children of God than we are. In the coming days, may the waters of baptism, the waters of our baptism, so cling to us that in their depths we see who we are, and from our depths reflect to others their true name, my name and your name and their name. Beloved, precious child of God, and beautiful to behold. Amen.